On a deadly winter night, Adam heard scratching at his door, a sound that shouldn't exist in the middle of nowhere. When he opened it, what he found left him frozen in shock. This wasn't just any visitor, it was a desperate cry for help. On a freezing winter night, snow covered the ground, trees bent under its weight, and icy winds howled through the forest. Adam sat slouched in an old armchair, a steaming cup of coffee cupped in his hands. The nights out here were long and lonely, but he had grown used to the solitude. 2 years in this cabin had taught him how to live with the silence, to embrace the stillness that came with being miles away from anyone else. The snowstorm outside was relentless, each gust of wind shaking the cabin walls and sending icy drafts through every tiny crack. Adam glanced at the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker, their hypnotic glow keeping the creeping sense of emptiness at bay. His thoughts wandered, as they often did, back to a life he had left behind. A life filled with laughter, love, and the warmth of human connection, things he hadn't allowed himself to think about in a long time. Then it happened. A sound broke through the howling wind, faint but unmistakable, a soft scratching at the door. Adam froze, his grip tightening around the coffee mug. At first, he thought it might be the wind playing tricks on his ears. But then it came again, louder this time. Scratch, scratch, scratch. His heart quickened. He wasn't expecting anyone. Out here, 5 miles from the nearest road, visitors were unheard of, especially in the middle of a snowstorm. Setting the mug down, he rose from the chair, his boots thudding softly against the wooden floor. He moved toward the door cautiously, each step accompanied by the groaning creak of old floorboards. As he reached the door, the scratching stopped. For a moment, the cabin fell into complete silence, the kind that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He hesitated, hand hovering over the doorknob, his breath fogging the air in front of him. Probably just a branch, he muttered under his breath, trying to convince himself. But deep down, he knew better. This wasn't the wind, nor the trees. There was something, or someone, outside. With a sharp inhale, he twisted the doorknob and pulled the door open just enough to peek outside. A gust of icy wind rushed in, biting at his face and filling the room with cold. But it wasn't the cold that made Adam's breath catch in his throat. There, on the snow-covered porch, was a dog. Its fur was matted with frost, its body trembling violently. It looked up at him with eyes that held both fear and desperation, as if pleading for help. Adam's grip on the door tightened. He didn't know it yet, but this moment was about to change everything. Adam stood frozen, staring down at the shivering dog on his porch. The icy wind whipped around him, biting his skin, but his eyes remained locked on the animal. It was small, thin, and trembling so violently that it looked like it might collapse at any moment. Frost clung to its fur in icy patches, and its deep, pleading eyes seemed to say what it couldn't: "Help me." The dog tried to take a step forward but stumbled, its front paw dragging awkwardly in the snow. Adam's gaze dropped to the injured leg, where a nasty gash ran along its side. The wound looked raw and painful, and frostbite had already started to creep in. The sight of it sent a pang of sympathy through him, but also a wave of uncertainty. "What are you doing out here?" Adam murmured, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. He glanced behind the dog, searching the snowy expanse for any sign of where it might have come from. There was nothing. Just the endless white of the storm, swallowing everything in its path. He looked back down at the dog, his mind racing. Out here, deep in the wilderness, animals weren't just pets, they were survivors, scavengers, sometimes even threats. Bringing one inside was a risk, especially one he didn't know. But as the dog looked up at him, its amber eyes filled with exhaustion and desperation, Adam felt his resolve waver. The dog whimpered softly, a sound so pitiful it tugged at something deep within him. Its body sagged, barely able to hold itself upright, and Adam realized it wasn't just cold, it was on the verge of collapse. He tightened his grip on the door, torn between instincts and compassion. Letting it inside meant bringing a potentially wild or sick animal into his safe space. But leaving it out here, in this storm, he knew what that would mean. "Damn it," Adam muttered under his breath. He rubbed a hand over his face, torn between what he should do and what he felt compelled to do. The dog took another unsteady step forward, its paw sinking into the snow, and let out a faint, broken whine. All right," he finally said, as if the dog had convinced him. Adam bent down cautiously, his movements slow so as not to scare it. He grabbed a thick blanket he had left near the door and draped it over the animal's frail body. The dog flinched at first but didn't resist, too weak to do anything but accept the warmth. "Let's get you inside," he whispered. He lifted the dog gently, its body surprisingly light, and carried it into the cabin. As the door shut behind them, the warmth from the wood stove enveloped them both. The dog let out a soft sigh, collapsing onto the floor near the fire. Adam stood over it, staring down at the fragile creature. For the first time in years, his solitude was interrupted, and he wasn't sure what to make of it. Adam knelt by the shivering dog, gently wrapping it in the thick blanket he had brought to the door. The dog barely moved, its frail body limp in his arms, but its faint breaths told him it was still holding on. He could feel the cold radiating off the animal as he carefully carried it into the warmth of the cabin. The wind slammed the door shut behind him, leaving the storm outside, but the freezing air seemed to linger on the dog's frostbitten fur. Placing the dog near the fireplace, Adam adjusted the blanket around it, making sure the warmth from the fire reached it. The dog let out a soft whimper, its head resting weakly on the wooden floor. Adam stepped back for a moment, standing over the fragile creature, unsure of what to do next. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of adrenaline and worry. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" he muttered softly, his voice trembling slightly. After a deep breath, he grabbed his first aid kit from a shelf in the kitchen. It wasn't much, just some antiseptic wipes, bandages, and ointment, but it would have to do. He crouched back down beside the dog, hesitating for a moment before reaching out to touch it. "Easy now," he murmured, his tone soft and reassuring. The dog flinched slightly at his touch but didn't pull away. Its amber eyes flicked up to meet his for a brief moment before closing again, as if it trusted him enough to let him help. Adam carefully examined the injured paw, noticing the deep gash and the frostbite around it. He winced at the sight, imagining the pain the dog must have endured. "This is going to sting a little," he warned, as though the dog could understand him. He cleaned the wound as gently as he could with an antiseptic wipe, the dog letting out a faint whimper but remaining still. Adam worked quickly, applying ointment to the frostbitten areas and wrapping the paw with a strip of gauze. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep the wound protected for now. Once he was done, Adam moved to the kitchen and filled a bowl with water and another with some leftover soup he had reheated. He placed both near the dog and stepped back, giving it space. At first, the dog didn't move, its body still weak and trembling. But after a few moments, its nose twitched, catching the scent of the food. Slowly, it lifted its head and leaned toward the bowl of soup, licking at it cautiously. "There you go," Adam said softly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He watched as the dog ate in small, careful bites, its eyes flicking toward him occasionally, as if to make sure he wasn't a threat. As the dog settled back onto the blanket, Adam couldn't help but feel a strange warmth in his chest. For the first time in a long while, the cabin didn't feel so empty. As the storm raged outside, Adam sat on the floor near the dog, his back resting against the side of the couch. The fire crackled softly, its warmth spreading through the small cabin. The dog lay curled up on the blanket, its breathing now steady but still shallow. Adam watched it closely, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. It had been a long time since he'd shared his space with anyone, or anything. "You're a tough little thing, aren't you?" Adam said, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, unsure if he was talking to himself or the dog. "What were you doing out there in this storm? No one should be out in weather like this." The dog's ears twitched slightly at the sound of his voice, though it didn't lift its head. Adam took that as a sign to keep going. Talking felt natural, even if he wasn't expecting a response. "I've been out here for a couple of years now," he continued, his eyes drifting to the frost-covered window. "Thought I needed the quiet, you know? Needed to get away from everything." He hesitated, the words catching in his throat. "But some days, the quiet gets too loud." The dog let out a soft sigh, shifting slightly on the blanket. Adam smiled faintly. "Guess you know what that feels like, huh? Being out there all alone." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I don't know where you came from, but you're safe now. I'll take care of you." For the first time, the dog raised its head, its eyes meeting his. There was something in its gaze, something that felt almost human. Gratitude? Trust? Adam couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it made his chest tighten. He reached out slowly, his hand hovering near the dog's head. After a moment of hesitation, the dog sniffed his fingers and then pressed its nose lightly against his palm. "Guess we're in this together," Adam said softly, a small smile breaking across his face. The hours passed, and the cabin grew quiet except for the crackling fire and the occasional howl of the wind. Adam stayed near the dog, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in silence. Each time he spoke, the dog seemed to relax a little more, its body sinking deeper into the warmth of the blanket. It even closed its eyes for a while, its trust in him growing with each passing minute. But as the night wore on, Adam noticed something strange. The dog's ears perked up, and its eyes darted toward the door. It shifted restlessly, its paws scraping lightly against the wooden floor. "What is it?" Adam asked, sitting up straight. The dog's gaze remained fixed on the door, its body tense as if it were listening for something. Then it stood, wobbling slightly on its injured leg, and let out a low, soft whine. "You want to go out there?" Adam frowned, glancing toward the door. "In this storm?" The dog whined again, taking a step toward the door and looking back at him, as if urging him to follow. Adam's heart raced. He didn't know what the dog wanted, but the look in its eyes told him it was something important. Something he couldn't ignore. The next morning, Adam woke to a quiet cabin, the storm outside finally having calmed. The sun peeked through the frost-covered windows, casting faint light over the wooden floor. He glanced at the dog, still curled up near the fire, but now looking more alert. Its ears twitched, and its eyes followed him as he moved around the room. There was something different about its demeanor, an energy, a sense of urgency. "You're restless," Adam said, kneeling by the dog. "What's going on, buddy?" The dog stood, wobbling slightly on its injured leg, and limped toward the door. It paused, looking back at Adam, its eyes pleading. Adam frowned, rubbing the back of his neck. "You want me to follow you, don't you?" The dog let out a soft whine and scratched at the door. Adam sighed, grabbing his heavy coat and boots. "All right, but if we're doing this, you better know where you're taking me," he said, trying to mask his unease. Bundled up against the cold, Adam opened the door, and the dog immediately stepped out into the fresh snow. The air was sharp and biting, the kind that stung his face and made his breath visible in the icy morning. Adam followed, his boots crunching loudly with every step, as the dog led the way into the forest. The journey wasn't easy. The snow was deep, and the ground beneath was uneven and slippery. Adam trudged through it, gripping tree branches for balance as he followed the dog's slow but determined steps. The wind picked up again, whipping around them and carrying with it the faint scent of pine and earth. "Where are you taking me?" Adam muttered under his breath, his legs growing heavier with each step. The dog didn't respond, of course, but its focus never wavered. It limped ahead, occasionally stopping to look back at Adam as if to make sure he was still following. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a small clearing tucked deep in the woods. The dog stopped suddenly, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. Adam stepped closer, his chest heaving from the effort of the hike. At first, he saw nothing but snow and trees. Then, in the shadow of a fallen log, he noticed movement. Squinting, Adam realized what he was looking at: two tiny puppies, huddled together in the snow. Their small bodies trembled, their fur clumped with frost, and their faint whimpers barely carried through the cold air. "Oh my God," Adam whispered, dropping to his knees. His heart ached as he took in the sight of the fragile pups. They were barely holding on, their breaths shallow and uneven. The dog stepped forward, nudging one of the puppies gently with its nose before turning back to Adam. Its eyes held the same desperate look as the night before. Adam understood now. The dog hadn't been seeking help just for itself, it had been trying to save its family. Without hesitation, Adam scooped up the puppies, cradling them carefully against his chest. "All right," he said softly, his voice breaking. "Let's get you all out of here." The dog limped close to his side as they began the slow journey back to the cabin, where warmth and safety awaited. Adam pushed the cabin door open, the warmth of the fire hitting him like a wave as he stepped inside, carrying the two tiny puppies bundled in his arms. The mother dog limped in behind him, her tired body shaking but her eyes filled with relief. Adam gently set the puppies down on a folded blanket near the fireplace and turned back to the mother dog, who sat down heavily, her sides heaving from exhaustion. "You did good," Adam said softly, crouching down to meet her gaze. He reached out a cautious hand and stroked the side of her face. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a brief moment as if she finally felt safe. The puppies whimpered softly, their tiny noses twitching as they adjusted to the warmth of the room. Adam quickly grabbed another blanket and wrapped it around them, his heart heavy as he realized how close they had been to freezing to death. "You're safe now," he whispered, looking at the fragile little creatures. "I'll take care of you. All of you." The days that followed were a blur of care and patience. Adam threw himself into nursing the dogs back to health, cleaning their wounds, feeding them, and ensuring they stayed warm. The mother dog, though injured, watched over her puppies with unwavering devotion. She would nuzzle them gently as they fed or curl around them protectively when they slept. For Adam, it was more than just helping the dogs, it was a healing process for himself. As he cared for them, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. The quiet, lonely days that had stretched endlessly before now seemed full, every hour spent ensuring the little family survived. One night, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered outside, Adam sat in his old chair, watching the dogs sleep. The puppies were growing stronger, their tiny bodies no longer trembling as they snuggled into their mother's side. The mother dog lay close to the fire, her eyes half closed in contentment. Adam leaned back, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You've changed everything, you know," he said softly, more to himself than to the dogs. "I thought I'd come out here to escape, to forget. But maybe I was just waiting for something to remind me why I'm still here." As the days turned into weeks, the dogs regained their strength. The puppies began exploring the cabin, their tiny paws tapping against the wooden floor as they played with each other. The mother dog's wounds healed, and her fur began to shine again. She trusted Adam completely now, often resting her head on his lap while he sat by the fire. In their presence, the cabin no longer felt like a lonely, empty place. It was filled with life and warmth, and for the first time in years, Adam didn't feel so alone. He had saved them, but in a way, they had saved him too. As winter slowly gave way to the first signs of spring, the snow began to melt, revealing patches of earth and the faint green shoots of new life. The forest surrounding Adam's cabin transformed day by day, and with it came the realization that his time with the dogs was coming to an end. the mother dog had regained her strength. Her fur now gleamed in the sunlight, her injured paw healed enough for her to walk without a limp. The puppies, no longer frail and weak, were bundles of energy, darting around the cabin, chasing each other and tumbling over blankets. They were healthy, strong, and ready for the life they were meant to live. Adam sat on the porch one morning, sipping his coffee and watching the dogs play in the clearing just outside the cabin. The mother dog lay nearby, her watchful eyes following her puppy's every move. Adam's heart felt heavy yet full as he thought about the journey they had shared. He had found them in their darkest moment, and they had found him in his. Together, they had brought each other back to life. "You're ready now, aren't you?" Adam said softly, glancing at the mother dog. She looked at him, her amber eyes calm and steady. It was as if she understood what he was saying, as if she too knew it was time to let go. Over the next few days, Adam prepared for their departure. He wanted to make sure the dogs had the best chance out in the wild. He found a safe spot deep in the forest, sheltered by tall trees and near a freshwater stream. It was the kind of place where they could thrive, where they could be free. The day finally came. Adam loaded a few supplies into a sled, some food, blankets, and anything that might help them adjust to their new home. The mother dog and her puppies followed him through the forest, the little ones bounding excitedly ahead while she stayed close to Adam's side. When they reached the clearing, Adam knelt down, unpacking the sled and arranging everything carefully. The puppies sniffed curiously at their new surroundings, their tiny tails wagging. The mother dog sat quietly, her gaze shifting between Adam and her new home. "Well," Adam said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is it. You're going to do just fine out here. I know it." He crouched down, running a hand gently over the mother dog's head. "You're strong. You've been strong from the start." The mother dog leaned into his touch, her eyes filled with something Adam couldn't quite explain, gratitude, trust, maybe even a quiet goodbye. The puppies ran back to him, pawing at his boots, and Adam let out a soft laugh, tears stinging his eyes. As he stood to leave, the dogs watched him, the mother staying close to her pups. Adam took a deep breath, turning back one last time. "You saved me, you know," he said quietly. "More than I could ever save you." The walk back to the cabin was quiet, the forest still and peaceful. Adam felt a bittersweet ache in his chest, but also a strange sense of fulfillment. He had come out here to escape, to lose himself in solitude. Instead, these dogs had reminded him of the beauty of connection, of care, and of letting go. For the first time in years, Adam didn't feel alone. He felt alive.